New Heights Wrestling. And today we got the man called Dave and AJ Strangebrew, and we're going to tackle what I find is an interesting topic. Dave, why don't you tell them what you decided on for this week?
Yes, I was saying to the boys that we should start doing a thing about favorite years in pro wrestling. And one of the years I'm excited to talk about at some point, I think we'll probably end up doing this first, but 1984.
1937.
Not 37. I don't think we'll ever get to 37. But yeah, there's, I just think, what basically, like, what do we like talking about, right? And I think, like, Joe, you got some lists from some people today. I got a few lists too. It wasn't like a usual 5-3-1 or anything. We just asked me what were your favorite years in wrestling. And one of the things you'll typically find is that people are going to tell you stuff that happened in that year that they remember, because that's why it's like one of their favorite years. Like if you're super into this, you grew up on it. It's like you got that connection. And for me, it's 84. It's just, like we'll talk about that a little bit today, but not too much because that's coming up. But like, and that's really it is. I just wanted something that we could all be kind of passionate about. Maybe we won't be passionate about every single year, but like we all have different years that we just really love this stuff. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of get into it, maybe see what wrestlers were on top that year, what storylines were going on, and some of the events that might have been happening.
Yeah, I find it hard to pin down like a specific year that I like. When I was looking at time frames, I've got like late 80s, 85 to 89, and then kind of that early to mid 90s WWF, and then 2018 to now, because it's kind of when I started getting in heavier. And then just to see where wrestling is now is interesting. Now, Randy Osgood bringing us an early question, because NWA Hard Times 3 tomorrow night, if I'm not mistaken. And Nick Aldis and the NWA seems like they're parting ways. He was fired and then kicked off of the pay-per-view.
Well, he made comments about the fact that his contract was coming to an end at the end of the year. And he talked about the fact that he wasn't re-signing because he's not happy with the direction of the NWA. So the NWA responded by suspending him and kicking him off of the pay-per-view. It's incredible how that suspension will work with only 2 months left to his contract. I'm sure he's absolutely just mortified that would happen.
Fix my microphone, Randy. Thank you. These motherfuckers were just gonna let me go on, not say a word. Like, no, you sound good, man.
I was thinking, I just heard you. I'm like, does he sound a little low? And then next thing I know, I actually I had a problem with the internet for a second. So if you looked at me, I was kind of frozen. So and I came back and Randy was like, Joe, you sound like shit.
I thought you were just going Barry White on the shit. So.
Oh man, you guys gotta say something. But back to favorite years in wrestling. Thank you, Randy.
1993 WCW, I think we can all agree, is the greatest year in the history of wrestling.
That is not true. That's interesting. I wonder, like 93, like I do remember 93 without even like looking anything up. Like I want to say that's if I'm off, Harlem Heat is in WCW around that time. Like William Regal is in there. He's probably already in his television title reign.
Did Harlem Heat lose the chains yet?
I think that was when they actually showed up for the first time. Was 1993.
Yeah, it depends. If they
probably had the chains.
They probably did in 93. Yeah.
Oof.
Randy, I was going to get to that later.
Harlem Heat did not show up in 1998. By then, they were already separated. Randy, you're way off on that. I'm sorry.
Now, I'm amazed that you guys can pick specific years. Like, I just remember eras. Like, Ryan Damon from the Mothership Facebook group has 1988, and he said because it was his first year.
Yeah.
Paul Lucas responded with, he may have seen a little sooner, but SummerSlam 88 was his first big show. I remember a lot of the 80s WWF from the Coliseum videos. I'd read a lot of the Survivor Series, the Royal Rumbles.
I think me and Dave will both agree that the reason why 84 is such a big year for us is that not only did you have what was going on in the NWA, but you had the transition from the Backlund era into the Hulk Hogan era. And that's why 84 sticks out to us so much. is just that transition into the wrestling that we knew in our childhood.
84, Hogan won the title. But again, not even looking this up. January of that year, I should just for giggles have when you look it up. I want to say it's January 23rd against the Iron Sheik, Madison Square Garden. And I remember hearing about it on like the Superstars. I think it wasn't Superstars yet, but it was like one of their TV shows. And they said Hulk Hogan won the title, and that's how they would just announce it sometimes. And then maybe you get footage a little bit later, and they show you the footage of like the leg drop and stuff. And it's like it's so different than now.
This was also you said,
yeah,
January '84. Hulk Hogan won the title from Iron Sheik. The specific date I think was 23rd. I could be off.
That would either be Superstars or I believe All Star Wrestling.
Hogan won it at the Garden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember what show, but I remember those were like the two big syndicated shows, I think.
Okay.
But here's the crazy thing, and some of you kids won't understand this. You had to actually really work to find the footage. You had to find like a VHS tape. You had to really work to find the footage of Hogan beating the Iron Sheik, because if you weren't in an area where it showed at a time when you could see it, you couldn't DVR it. You couldn't look it up on the Google. You didn't have 16 friends to share it with you on God knows what app. You had to actually really try to find it. If anything, you got lucky and you saw a photo of it 3 months later in PW Illustrated and PWI.
I remember just being excited when I found wrestling shows like on other channels. And like I was just talking about it with the guys from A to the K the other day. Like, so I remember like this is why I don't understand why people like hate one organization or love it. Like, just don't watch the shit if you don't like it, whatever. But like, I remember being so like, okay, I was a WWF guy, I was an NWA guy, I was an AWA guy before NWA guy actually, because I found them first. And then like one day out of nowhere, we get Mid-South UWF with Bill Watts on it for a little while, and that was like mind blown. Like, this was the best wrestling could ever watch.
Another one that was similar to that was I would get ICW, which was run by the Savaldis.
Yes.
And they would get some of the NWA talent in there, but they would also get like oddities because they weren't necessarily in an NWA territory. You would get different wrestlers that didn't necessarily make sense. So you're sitting here, if you're an NWA guy or a WWF guy, and you're going, wait a minute, how can these guys both be on the same show?
So let me talk to you about a problem I had as a kid. This is very unique, and I'm just remembering this now. I remember noticing that certain wrestlers only wrestled for certain companies, right? Like it was their WWF, AWA, but sometimes AWA and NWA would work together, and then sometimes they would show tape stuff from years ago too, especially AWA would do that. And I remember being very confused. Like, oh, that's old. Okay. But then they would talk like Ric Flair's coming, and I'm like, is that a mistake? Like, what do you mean Ric Flair's coming to the AWA? Like, what's going on? Like, that can't be right. And I didn't want to like, no, you wrestle where you wrestle.
Then you had shows like I can't remember which AWA show it was, but it was a joint adventure, and they actually had the Bulldogs, the British Bulldogs, and the Rock and Roll Express on the same card, and It was the most confusing thing in the world because it was the first time I saw AWA, WWF wrestlers, and NWA wrestlers all on the same card.
Well, I think they kind of like they played that up, but I think Bulldogs had just left WWF for a little bit that time. Yeah, but. Yeah, they would. AWA and NWA would work together from time to time, and then eventually AWA started working with World Class and the USWA and that whole thing. That'd be like 88, 89, I want to say.
Well, the other things that were very distinct in that time period was, and you don't have it anymore, you don't have people that are debating going, well, Roman Reigns is the real world's champion, and John Moxley, his belt doesn't mean anything.
Right,
but back then, like I was huge NWA and Dave I know was huge WWF. We would literally get into debates, even though we didn't know each other at that time. If you followed what wrestlers you had, you would get into huge debates over. No, Hulk Hogan's the real world's champion. Oh, come on, Ric Flair wrestles everywhere. It was real.
And again, I'm a kid, so my logic was a little different back then. And I was like, I kind of liked the NWA and the wrestling did. But I'm like, I looked at him and I saw Ric Flair as a champion, and I'm like, Oh, no, he's not very big. I already saw Hulk Hogan beat King Kong Bundy and Andre the Giant. Ric Flair would have no chance against this man because it was real to me. It was real. And I wasn't necessarily a Hogan guy, but
which is why to this day Dave hates Rey Mysterio.
No, that's not it. I hate Rey Mysterio. I would have loved Rey, I think, as a kid, but I don't know if I would have thought like he would have stood a chance against any of the people. I just would have, because I believed it. It was real, and I'd have been like,
yeah. If they had booked Big Boss Man versus Rey Mysterio, that would have we would have struggled with that.
And another thing too, when this is very unique, I think Ric Flair and Dusty both had kind of the bleach blonde hair. It looked white to me as a child, so I just thought they were old. And I remember thinking, I like Dusty. He's a good guy. But, he would never be compared to, Hulk Hogan or Jimmy Snooker.
They weren't real blondes like Hogan.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know, they looked old to me, and their heads were all carved up and everything. And I was like, oh, no. These guys would never had a chance.
With that full head of hair, Hogan looked so young.
I almost want to troll people right now because this is true, but I almost want to be like, I'm not like that guy. I'm just whatever wrestler now, but I always think it'd be funny just they would never stand a chance against the great superstars of the World Wrestling Federation.
A funny story from Dave's childhood that I'm going to share with you guys is his biggest fear at one point was for Hulk Hogan because he thought Brian Adias was going to come with that deadly move that he had in World Class Wrestling and take out Hulk Hogan,
which was a thumb to the neck. And now, if you know the real story, years later we found out Kevin Von Erich was just drunk and fucked up the night before, and he got hit and started choking. So they sold it as this devastating move. And I saw, wow, this guy can hit somebody with the thumb in his neck. He's going to take over the rest of wrestling. Wait till he gets. Then I realized years later, oh no, nobody's going to book Brian Adias to be the world champion.
The funny thing is, other wrestlers in the future did actually use that as a finisher and took that move.
Yeah,
so
Gordy.
Absolutely incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, Gordy used it.
However, Gordy was a 6'6", freaking 300-pound wrestler. Brian Adias was about 5'11" and about 210 pounds.
No, and the other thing too is they would sell it too. Gordy went to the Far East and learned this whole, and we're just whoa, wow, he did. I don't believe that shit now. No, man, I Google. They're not doing that in China. Nobody's going around hitting people in the neck.
Yeah, he made it once to Far Eastern Tennessee.
Well, guys, I'm going to bring you another response from the Mothership Facebook group. Michael Adrian Doonan said 97 or 99. 97 because I was a huge Bret Hart fan and loved the Canada versus USA theme.
Yes.
99 because wrestling seemed to be at its peak of popularity and everybody was into it.
I would lean more towards 97 because WCW was at its best in that point also. So you had both really hitting on all cylinders with Bret Hart and what he was doing, and then having WCW. Whereas in 99, you were starting to really see the cracks in WCW, and they were starting to fall apart.
Well, Zach Grant says I'd say everything between 97 and 2000, which I don't know if I'd say everything, but
no, but that 97 thing, I heard Mick Foley say this too. WWE creatively was really starting to pick up steam, but it wasn't showing in the ratings necessarily yet. And I think if you go back and you look at that Hart Foundation run, and I'm talking about not Brett and Jim, but in 97, where it's Brett, Pillman, Bulldog, Owen, and Evo, and you look at how the reaction they got in the States, they were just vilified heels. And then the reaction they got everywhere else in the world where they were just so beloved. I thought that was pretty novel at the time.
I'm going to quote somebody who was pretty involved in wrestling at that time period, Eric Bischoff. And he was dominating numbers in 97 and in that time period. But he's the first one to tell you that the ratings are the most overrated thing that you can actually look at, that there is so much more to it than the ratings and when it comes to what is going on in wrestling. And that when you look at how on fire, like you were talking about, Bret Hart was in that time period, that to me would still hold up today. That is something that you could go and do today and would still work until a point. I think MJF does a similar thing, to be honest with you.
I agree. I'm going to read a list real quick too, Joe. Mike Flynn, he sent me several years. 96, 97, 2000, 2002, then 2013, and then 2019 and 2020 before pandemic. He said 80s and early 90s definitely was where I got super into it, but being so young. But he says in 2013, that's when he kind of really got back with the Shield, NXT starting to take off. AEW would come by later, and just a lot of stuff that's going on right now.
Well, one of the things that people forget is that there are drop-offs in different times. Wrestling is very much up and down and ebb and flows. And it's not always necessarily the talent level, because if you look at some of the lowest ratings in wrestling, believe it or not, it's when Shawn Michaels was actually the heavyweight champion of the world. And it's nothing against Shawn Michaels in that time period. It just was not a time between the steroid trials leading into it and between everything going on. And we had a similar thing in the 2000s, where unfortunately the time period between in the mid 2000 and 2010 started to slow down a little bit because it was so hot. And then you picked up steam again, like he was saying, in 2013, which was a great time period. But then it started to drop off again.
Right.
And then once again, it was starting to pick up again right before we hit the pandemic. And then, of course, we hit a pandemic.
Yes.
So to his point, all of those years are good years. It's so easy to go, hey, this is on the talent for not being entertaining during this time period. But sometimes the fans just get worn out, no matter how good the product is. Sometimes too much is too much.
I don't know if it's fair anymore, that old school mentality of,
putting asses in
falls
the
on the
seats.
world champion.
Yeah.
No. I don't think it's this.
Oh, I feel bad for Moxley right now because all the garbage that's going on with AEW behind the scenes. He's doing a great job as a champion. He's fantastic. They've got very talented crew of wrestlers there. But I'm not sure Tony Khan knows what to do from this point on. And they've had such a problem backstage of keeping talent actually getting along, which is the opposite of what they started with. They started off like it was freaking Woodstock, for Christ's sakes, and they were all in love.
Guys, I'm going to interrupt here real quick. Breaking news, comedian Gallagher is dead. He, in fact, has been smashed by the watermelon. Gallagher, too, still alive.
I was actually going to say, was he going through the produce section and a watermelon fell on him?
I just heard that, so I had to interrupt. Sorry to disrupt the conversation.
I can only hope we go viral, and that was like the comments that we'll get most famous for. It was first broken here. Yeah, then they smashed the watermelon on the motherfucker. Ah!
Yeah. They're going to cut out who exactly died, and then they're going to make it like AJ said something racist. Like, yeah, I bet a watermelon hit him. But
that's exactly what they're going to do to us.
Let me bring you another list from the Mothership Facebook group. Harry Priest said, Joe, you could have at least asked for our top 5. Well, that didn't work the last couple times, so that's why we changed it up. But maybe next week we'll do the top 5. But he said 92 for me. An odd one for some, but it had the best Rumble and the best War Games. You have Steamboat and Rude tearing it up, Pillman and Liger, Piper and Hart and Davey, plus the best of the Hart-Michaels matches for me at Survivor Series at that point.
He's not wrong. That's a good year for wrestling.
I'll be honest with you. To me, 92 is the drop-off point. That's 92 is where it actually levels out, and then 93 is where everything just hits the fan and frickin' just drops.
See, 92, I started to get into it again a little bit because that's when Flair made his return home to the WWF. And he
well, I think we can agree it's the first time in the history of the WWF that since Bruno Sammartino, that they had a real world's champion.
The real world's champion.
Now, let me see. Cordell Everett Jr. says 1986. I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Crockett Promotions was hotter than ever. I went to the Great American Bash, and I was able to pick up Mid-South Florida Wrestling and WCCW on cable.
Okay, first of all, I'm going to agree with him. 86 is a great year for wrestling. However, to say they were hotter than ever is bullshit because 85 was the best year in the NWA period. Um, however, I love his time period. 1986 is a great year. Dusty Rhodes was on fire. You had the Four Horsemen that were on fire. Barry Windham was fantastic that year. You saw what a great young talent he was. Thank God they finally brought in Lex Luger to show everybody how to wrestle. It's just such a great year for wrestling in the NWA.
So let me throw a couple at you here real quick. Zach St. John was a 95 to 98 guy. He also loved 92 for the WCW Saturday nights back then. And Jake St. John was 95, 96. And, you know, he talked about 87, 88, but he said Nitro was so on fire between 95 and 96. And one other thing Jake added, which this is not necessarily the year, but I thought it was interesting. He said nothing was better than getting the old PWI newsletter in the mail, and it gave you all the up-to-date rumors and spoilers of what was going on our weekly results, and they were so great. And here's the thing.
He's talking about the magazine, right?
Yes. No, the news. I thought it was the newsletter.
He said the newsletter, but PWI is a magazine.
Right. No, it is a magazine, but they used to have a separate newsletter because the magazine would be like 3 months behind, whereas the newsletter they would send out would actually give you stuff ahead of time.
I did not know if they had a newsletter, but I will tell you.
I'm 99% sure they had a separate newsletter.
PWI newsletter.
Well, I will say this. Jake St. John, he didn't talk about this, but I'll talk about it. He got his letter written in PW Insider. He actually wrote to one of the things, and I still remember it, where he talked about his... Yeah. Sid was one of his favorite wrestlers, and he talked about how Flair never gave him a fair shot, and the Road Warriors were one of his favorite tag teams of all time. Could be missing a few things, but that is in there. Feel free to ask Jake about that. His thing got printed. So
he also talked about a sleigh that he had called Rosebud. However, that another magazine in that time period that you might have forgotten about is there was a magazine, Wow Magazine, which actually leaned more towards giving you spoilers and also leaned more towards ECW and stuff of that nature. So they gave you a different view on wrestling than your Pro Wrestling Illustrated or your other magazines of that time. It wasn't
as kayfabe. They'd actually talk about stuff behind the scenes.
Exactly. It wasn't completely just done in kayfabe.
Yeah. Whereas PWI would just literally make up storylines.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, the results, like that section when they would give it the arena, like that meant something to me for a little while. When I read, like, oh, who's beating who, you know? And then you realize that the same damn match happened on 20 different house shows. After a while, you're like, okay, I see what they're doing here.
So my favorite thing in any of the magazines was always if they did a this day or this month in history or this day in history. Yeah. I always like to go back through the timeline and actually see what had happened, whether it was 1937, 1956, and it would show you the difference in wrestling, and you could actually see how wrestling had progressed through the years.
There you go, Randy Osgood, big fan of WoW.
That was something in the 90s I enjoyed of the magazines, was not only seeing the rankings of each federation and seeing who the champions were, but also they would show state to state the different cards that happened. So you could see how a WWE card looked from area to area, or you could see who's wrestling the indies in a certain area. They still do it to this day.
And I suspected as like at one point, I think like maybe in my teens, I was like, I remember thinking like seeing like the cards that would come to like just our shows, you know, like in Connecticut. And I said, is this the same show pretty much everywhere? And then you find out it really was. Like they might have a couple that different depending on the market here or there, but a lot of the matches were the same, you know, in all the different house shows.
Or yeah, two different singles might end up as a tag team on one card.
Something could happen different, but for the most part they were the same. But yeah, it was interesting to see. You know.
Now, this discussion really got like a better response from people than I expected. We had thought this had dried up. But you talk about people's favorite years. Mike Clark says 1986. UWF and JCP were absolutely on fire. And this was can't miss TV for me every week. Continental had a very underrated year. Good TV. Memphis had a good year highlighted by the Bill and Buddy show. AWA had a good year highlighted by the Rockers / Rose and Summers feud and the Bockwinkel versus Hennig matches. Florida was down a little, but still had its moments and decent TV. World Class was pretty forgettable. WWF was good, highlighted by Hogan Orndorff. And it was probably the first year that I actually got into WWF TV. And yes, I was lucky enough to get all of these promotions on TV in 86. Yeah. So for that time period, it's amazing to get that much. Because I remember just getting WWF. And then when I stumbled on WCW, I was just blown away. I'm like, what is this? And Randy, we will not be going to AEW in Bridgeport next week.
If to be honest with you, if I had gotten all of that wrestling that he got, I may never have left my house as a child.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, because I remember just picking up like the one federation. So to get like 5 or 6 different ones and such varied ones too, because WWF is one thing, but then you're getting the WCCW Southern style. You're getting the Memphis, the WCW, and really a taste of that territorial nature.
I will tell you the first time I was disappointed in finding other wrestling. As I mentioned before, I was extremely happy when I discovered UWF Mid-South with Bill Watts.
I know where Dave's going with this.
However, I was excited initially when I saw there was another UWF. And I was like, oh man, it's back, my favorite promotion. And then I'm looking, I'm like, oh, names I recognize, like Dr. Death Steve Williams, B-Blind Ware. But for some reason, it was just a car wreck. And even I didn't know why, but it would range from either boring or stuff that didn't make sense. Like some referee who decided not to sell for Dr. Death Steve Williams one day. And I thought, this is kind of crazy. And
it was late, great Herb Abrams.
Yeah, he was just super annoying as a commentator. And I don't know, the show was a miss, despite the fact it did have talent, but it was not Bill Watts' UWF. I was disappointed.
It certainly didn't have the entertainment level that Bill Watts had. Bill Watts knew how to put matches together. He knew how to build up talent. If you don't think so, go and check out Junkyard Dog in the old Mid-South area. See what Michael Hayes did back then. I mean, you had fans that wanted to kill Michael Hayes for turning on Junkyard Dog in the Louisiana Dome, in the Superdome in Louisiana, sorry. But that time period was just absolutely incredible. And unfortunately, Herb Abrams completely missed the boat.
That he did.
Now, Kevin Petrie said 1984. I had been watching wrestling before, but that's at 10. That was the first year I got it and realized in the Knoxville area, I got lots of wrestling all weekend long. CCW, JCP, Memphis, and more. Salad days before I got smart and realized it's better when you still believe.
One of the worst things that can happen to any wrestling fan is getting smart. When you feel like you've gotten smarter than the product is when you start to not enjoy it as much. And it's a shame, really.
Speaking of that, like in 1984, like again, we're going to be talking about this. When I look back at it, a couple interesting events that happened out of wrestling that year. Ken Patera and Saito got arrested. That was the McDonald's incident where Patera threw the boulder. And then that was actually the same year, too. Like, man, we already had Hogan win the world title, all this crazy stuff happening. That was the year that Dr. D. David Schultz slapped John Stossel as well for asking if wrestling was fake. So you weren't going to get sworn up by Dr. D.
See, now I don't know how you feel about the Dr. D, but I can remember being a kid, and I was actually happy he slapped the reporter. I was like, that's right. You're going to ask that question? You deserve to get slapped. Good for you, Dr. D.
I'll tell you what I thought about it. I was like, because again, I thought it was real. I was like, that man must have been crazy. Why would you ask such a stupid question? Oh, my God. And Dr. D, now I will say this too. Dr. D, David Schultz, I remember seeing some stuff with him in the WWF before for how long he was in there. And there were a few guys as a kid that scared me. Kamala had a spear. I thought he was going to use that and kill somebody. I thought for real that's what happened. Abdullah, he looked crazy. I didn't, But Dr. D, David Schultz, the way he talked, and they did a segment with him on TNT where he was like shooting off some guns and stuff too. And I thought, this guy's going to shoot someone. He's crazy. I had to go get my parents. I'm like, I think he's going to kill someone. Like, I was scared.
So I was one of the few kids in that time period that was not a Hulkamaniac. I leaned towards the heels, and I actually loved Dr. D. David Schultz. And now, obviously, we know what happened, but in that time period, I couldn't understand why he wasn't on TV. I'm sitting here going, why is not why am I not getting to see one of my favorite wrestlers? This guy's whooped everybody's ass. Why am I not seeing him go after Hulk Hogan?
So here's the thing, and as much as I've put over like Roman Reigns' current run recently, back in the day, a lot of times, and even now to a point, I wasn't always a fan of dominant like title runs. Hogan was so dominant. I still liked him because, yay, good guys win the good fight. That's right, brother. We're heroes, you know. But I always wanted, like, okay, maybe Jimmy Snuka could get a run. You know, I liked him. He did the flying Superfly splash, or maybe Mr. USA Tony Atlas. You know, like the way he could press people. And I always wanted Mr. Wonderful to be a good guy. When he was for a while, I was super happy. But yeah, I was just never like I didn't hate Hogan, but he wasn't my guy.
Well, it also never logically made sense to me because they're not a tag team. Why the baby faces, why the good guys couldn't actually go for the belt? I was like,
Right.
wait a minute, they're wrestling, they're beating all these people, and they don't get a chance for a championship? What
You're
the
a
hell?
competitor. You're an athlete. Like, what's going on here?
I was like, why does Tito Santana only get to go after the Intercontinental title?
One more. I know Joe's a lot of talking, but I just had to say, too, I don't know why he's reminding me of Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Loved him in the AWA. But, like, when he was going to wrestle Hogan, they had him have a couple, like, time limit draws with guys like Bret Hart. And I ended up loving Bret. But at the time, Bret was a tag guy. And I remember thinking, oh, Mr. Perfect has no chance against Hulk Hogan. This is going to be it. And then he beat Hogan by a count out, even though I love Perfect, and I would go on to love Perfect way more than Hulk Hogan. At the time, I was annoyed. Like, why is this guy, like, we can't have him win? Like, he's not that good. He doesn't deserve this.
Why does this genius guy get to keep helping him?
He won by a count out, too. Lanny Poffo. That one was just almost so comical to me as a kid. I'm like, well, we know he ain't shit.
Well, guys, we're going to wrap it up here because this was kind of the kickoff point to what we're going to talk about for the rest of the year. Obviously, December is always like our best of the year episodes, but we're also going to incorporate these best of the year talks. Now, we're going to try something this week. We're going to put it out to you, and this is a little bit of an audible because we're going to do the 5-3. We're going to do your top 5 favorite wrestling years, 5-3-1. If we don't get any responses, we're going to talk 1984. So it's up to you. Either way, you're going to get something, but we seem to have such a good response that it's like, give us your top 5 years.
Mothership, I'm asking you guys, come back with 84 because I know these new bloods ain't going to give me 84.
Why don't we do something too? Because we're going to do the 5-3-1 and we're going to do that with the years. Why don't we discuss whatever year wins that 5-3-1 the following week? We'll go in depth into that year.
And then 84, suck my ass.
That sounds like a good idea. So guys, join us again next week. And we got some more stuff. We're cooking some stuff up for you. We might be getting rid of that intro video.
Joe, you cannot share
AJ,
with everybody.
We're going to say it face to face here. We've been talking about it in different episodes. You've been shitting on our intro video. I spent a week in the woods cooking up some shit to shut you up. And that's what we're going to do in 2023. That's the slogan. Let's shut up Strangebrew.
I would like to point out we are not cooking up what most white people cook up. No meth here.
Exactly.
We got you, baby.
So did you guys want to say anything else before we go out?
I'm with Dave. I want to talk 1984. Guys, let's get this done. Vote for your favorite year. Let us know what your favorite year is. Like I said, I'm with Dave.
Or don't 1984 vote. That's another good way to get it.
Yeah, if you don't vote at all, you're going to get 1984. So if you're one of those,
eventually,
if you're one of those 1990s kids, or maybe you're the 2000s and you want to talk about that, you better vote because otherwise we're talking 84.
Well, what I want to do too is like I want to take a year like 84 or something and then Maybe we can break down a week. Give me the top 5 bad guys of 84. Give me the top 5 good guys of 84. You know,
we can debate. Here's something we can debate. NWA versus WWF 1984. Which one was the better product? Which champion was the better freaking champion?
That's not a debate. Hulk Hogan, he had the muscles.
You're out of your mind.
So guys, as we always say on the Working Fans podcast, you're going to get it one way or another. So we'll see you again next week.